Thanks for joining us. So I'm here today with Chris Plumridge from Microsoft and also Pete Lewis. Both work in engineering kind of roles within Microsoft Surface. So we wanted to have further our discussions that we've been having on, and this topic here is about sustainability. And so thinking about Surface devices, this has been a bit of a journey over the last few years. But Microsoft's got some pretty ambitious targets around sustainability. Who wants to talk about that? Kick off with.
Yeah, so back in I think 2018 or 2019, we set up these pretty ambitious goals by 2030 is sort of the main one we're targeting now around basically being carbon negative by 2030. We're also going to have zero waste as well, going to be water positive and also protecting our ecosystem. So that's Microsoft's top line sustainability goals. Surface really then aligns to being carbon negative and how we can impact that.
Yeah.
And then the other part we're aligned to is a zero waste. So that's sort of where our pillars lie. And sort of the pillars we have within that around carbon negative are reducing our carbon footprint across supply chain.
Yeah.
And that's everything from our own supply chain, the partners that we use in that supply chain, and also then our partners that deliver a lot of our goods in the commercial space and also in the consumer space as well. So a whole bunch of stuff we're doing around there. And from the zero waste, that's where it's really interesting because we're thinking about what materials we're using to build our products. So more recycled materials. We have a very ambitious target to make all our packaging in the commercial and the consumer space made of 100% recycled materials by 2030. We're on a pretty good trajectory there at the moment. There's
Yeah.
some things we need to sort of just tighten up, but I think, personally, I'm a big advocate for sustainability, and I think what we're doing is quite amazing. And there's not too many, I think, consumer type brands out there are really being as transparent as we are with things like our eco profile. So every new product we release, we talk about the percentage of materials that it's made from, and we talk about the expected CO2 emissions across the full life cycle of the device. So that's really important. Then the last piece is around how we're making devices more repairable,
Yeah.
how we're making those components recyclable. You can refurbish devices as well. So there's a whole bunch of little pieces within that, but I think overall we're really aligning and on target to hit that 2030 metric that we want to hit with Microsoft as a whole.
I think Pete wants to say something on this point.
Yeah, so one of the points you touched on was the materials that are actually used. The actual magnets that you see
Yep.
in these devices are entirely recycled because rare earth minerals are exactly that. They're rare and finite.
Yeah, true.
We are trying to reuse as many of those as possible. So we use 100% recycled magnets through the devices, and those magnets are actually calibrated for each device. So we go through a process with every single device through the manufacturing process to monitor exactly how much the magnetic
that
strength is.
Strength could vary from
Yep.
magnet to magnet, right?
And replace that magnet with another. So there's literally a calibration that
So
goes
we're talking
across
about
each of
things like the magnets that hold the lid closed.
them. 100%.
Yeah.
That magnetic component,
Or the attach of the keyboard to the, yeah.
just like that, that's a calibrated, engineered
Yeah.
magnetic component, the same as this, where the Hall sensor actually picks up. Those magnets through there are calibrated to be the same across every single device.
So there's a magnet at the top of the device here that detects when the screen is opened or closed.
Yes.
Right,
Yep.
that's the Hall sensor you're talking about
Correct.
there.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a cool sustainability story.
Yeah, I think for me, just thinking about from a customer lens, this is becoming more and more important for our customers because what we can do, we have a surface carbon emissions estimator, and so it's a tool online that's available to all our customers to go to.
We might even link to that in the description.
Yeah,
of this video, right?
100%. And so it's available for you basically to go in and say, if I was to refresh 2,000 of our laptops for our employees and their fleet, what potential carbon impact would I have using Surface Laptop 7th edition as an example?
So it's going to take all of those inputs all the way
All
through the
those
supply
inputs
chain?
that we basically have, and you can do by country as well, because different countries they have different ways they measure things by. And essentially, out of that, you can get a one pager or a more detailed report that basically says these are your estimated CO2 emissions across the life cycle of 3 or 4 years for 2,000 devices if you were to use Surface. Now, that data can then be given to your sustainability lead or anyone else within your business. And essentially, we can potentially, as Microsoft, help you by deploying Surface to hit your own Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions, which is super important.
So, like if you sort of stand back and go, why is Microsoft doing this? There's obviously a pragmatic thing that customers require it, which is nice, yeah.
Yeah.
But obviously there's some bigger ambitions there for Microsoft to leave the place better than we found it. Yeah.
100%. I mean, we're again back to my point in the previous video that we spoke about in terms of where, it's the only physical product that we actually build at Microsoft outside of the Xbox. There's a very important part for us to play. Obviously, we're building data centers, we're consuming a lot of power, doing all that stuff as well. But this is front and center. This is something that people see, and the amount of e-waste that's happening every year is phenomenal. And so, the best things that we can do, we're going to continue trying innovating. Actually, another really fun fact is when we release a product, between when we start releasing it and we actually then go end of life, we actually try and make it more carbon friendly across that life cycle. So if we have new manufacturing processes or we come across new ways to do our logistics and supply chain, we actually implement that on the fly to that product. So I think it's laptop 5 or laptop 6 was actually more carbon efficient at the end of its life cycle than it was at the beginning because of those implementations we did around innovations in supply chain,
Through the life
manufacturing
cycle.
processes, different ways we use materials. We actually, if we come across those innovations, we will then implement that where it makes sense into current generation products.
And it's only by having those really ambitious goals. I mean, we're 5 years away from 2030.
Yeah,
It's hard to believe,
true.
isn't it?
It is.
But there's not much time left to meet that pretty lofty goal there. So, I mean, some of the practical things we've seen as well, in the last few years, there's been that move towards recyclable packaging, cardboard boxes that the devices come in. We talked about the bamboo sleeve that, it's not a plastic, cover anymore on these devices. It's bamboo. You're basically not going to find any plastic in that, at least that commercial box, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
Which is pretty impressive.
Even actually the consumer box is right down to the smallest amount. And in fact, I believe this year, 2025, we're targeting to do 100% recyclable on the consumer box as well.
Yeah, because the consumer boxes are always shiny and they were wrapped in plastic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a different, as you see, commercial customers are far more aware of the sustainability piece.
Yeah.
But where we benefit here in the consumer space, the commercial space, the consumers benefit from that as well because they get recyclable packaging.
Yeah, and I think like what I've seen from an IT perspective, because we obviously deal with all sorts of OEMs here and we sell devices from different people, but the waste that comes out of a deployment, if we roll out 1,000 devices like Surface, we got to deal with all of those boxes and waste as an IT department. And it can be a bit of a nightmare. There's so much, plastic, polystyrene, things like that we see in other boxes that's a little bit shocking when you see all that go into a skip and go off to landfill. We don't have that with Surface. Everything can go straight into the recycling bin and straight off, into a recycle process.
But even past that, the resources that they come from either sustainable forested wood and trees to get that material, or it's recycled material. And we're doing more and more to build and essentially reuse those things. And speaking of recovery, we're also looking at piloting some of the resource recovery from the devices itself. So taking the devices back through other vendors, but recovering those materials so that they're reused and not coming back into the same supply chain. So the idea is to have these devices be as cyclical as possible.
Yeah, and I think that's a really worthy course.
And just I've been here for 11 years now, and I've been through a journey. I mean, we were a consumer company first and foremost when we first started 11 years ago, right? We were focused on being the Apple of the Windows ecosystem. That's what we wanted to do in the consumer space, and that's why we started off as a business. I remember there was a customer that was on one of our very first customer advisory boards that sent us a photo. They'd just deployed 500 Surface Pros at that time. And at that stage, we only had consumer packaging even in the commercial space. We're basically repurposing consumer products in the commercial space. We had a photo of basically a storeroom that was full of exactly what you just called out before, bits of plastic and all this boxes that was just not great at all. And that actually started us as part of that customer advisory board on the journey to be better with our commercial packaging, right? So again, I think that's a bit of a learning that we take these learnings. We have things like the customer advisory boards, my role, Pete's role, all these field-based roles to actually take the feedback from the customers, put it back into our machine that is the core back in Redmond, and these things eventually over time become a reality.
Product. Yeah, absolutely. And Pete, we were talking about this device here, the Surface Pro, and the aluminium. A few years back, Microsoft switched from making the case, the bucket they call it, which is the back case effectively of the device, from magnesium. They switched to aluminium. There's a cool sustainability story behind that too, right?
100%. And that aluminium, because it's machined out of one piece of aluminium, at one time, whilst they were recycling it, they weren't recovering those aluminium pieces. And with aluminium, you can much more easily recycle that material and bring it in.
So we take it and melt it back
yeah.
down, put it back into
So now that 100%, all of the aluminium that's used in these devices is used in these devices.
Yep.
So we don't have a waste with the production. And indeed, through every piece, whenever we look at vendors, whenever we look at any of the components, etc., that sustainability is a huge part of how we make those decisions. Usability first, sustainability, repairability, all of that stuff really comes into the larger design and ethos that sort of sits behind the Surface product.
Love it. Yep. And the last thing we might just touch on here, now we're going to do a demo on repairability. So Pete and I, we're going to pull apart my beautiful blue Surface Pro. We're actually going to take this apart. But that also has a big part to play in sustainability, right? If we have to throw these devices away when the battery goes dead or the
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And maybe if I just go back, right,
Yeah.
when I first started with Surface, Surface Pro 3, 4, I mean, did a little bit before that, but iFixit gave them a repairability score of 1, right?
Yeah.
And
If we're lucky, it might have been 0.5.
Yeah. Now we've seen a complete pivot on that. Thank goodness, right? I'm all for repairability of these products. I think they should have been repairable from the get-go. But there was always an argument back and forth about why that didn't happen. But now, what are we seeing? Like we've seen, Microsoft partnered with iFixit to create the tools that we're going to use
100%.
to pull these devices apart, so that you can repair the device. Our technicians here, we have certified technicians from Surface that actually repair devices for Surface here in Australia. But even I, as a consumer, could buy the tools that I need, or as a repair shop down the road, can easily buy the tools that I need and inexpensively buy the tools that I need to make repairs on these devices.
Yeah.
That's a big change.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen the repairability scores go through the roof because of that, right?
Yeah, well, yes, we did. And I have spoken with one of the product designers early on who created the Pro 4, which iFixit called the glue-filled monstrosity.
Yes.
When they tried to pull it apart, the glue behind the screen, it was just impossible to get in to do that. And that's one component of it that we've worked quite hard to actually allow that debonding process to happen. But even if you go a bit lower tech, the things like the door, the SSD door that's here,
Yes. That just pops open, right?
it does. You don't
no
need
screws.
tools. You don't need anything.
Yeah.
You can effectively just take the door off, remove the SSD with a Torx screwdriver. Again, it's not the most common screwdriver in the world.
Well, they're pretty common, but yeah.
That's by design,
Yeah.
so that you're not just
We don't want the kids to take
exactly,
it out, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So simple decisions like that, design decisions to make some things easier. But even when we're going through the repair, you'll see there's design decisions that go into having that be accessible before you access anything.
Yeah.
When you take that SSD out, you are completely shorting the device, so it's a safety function.
Yep.
And a lot of people don't see that, don't know that.
Yep.
But it is important to make sure you take the SSD out first.
And ultimately, that ability to repair the device is going to impact its sustainability.
100%,
So
yeah.
we keep it on our, in our fleet for 3 years, but it will go on and have another life after that. And that, I think, contributes obviously from a sustainability perspective, and that's really important. But it also keeps value in the device, which a lot of people don't consider, right? It's not just something that you chuck away with no value at the end of the 3 years or 5 years that you keep it. It's actually something that has a residual value that's generally higher than some of the competitors, right?
Yeah, well, we do try to ensure the device has as long a usable lifespan as possible.
Yeah.
That we've recently introduced the 6 years of firmware updates and updates to the drivers to allow for that device to be used longer and get that longevity. Again, sustainability, repairability, but also from a commercial side of it, you get the higher resale. You could sweat that device longer and keep it in your environment longer. However, then you may not get an NPU if you're using an older device.
We want people to upgrade. But look, the reality is, though, like by including that and designing for sustainability, everybody wins. Yeah.
Right.
Well, if you enjoyed this discussion and any of our other discussions, make sure that you hit subscribe and the notification bell. We will be back to demonstrate that repair that we're going to do. But also we want to talk a little bit more about security. We want to talk about Windows 11 and the change from Windows 10. We're going to finish off by talking about Copilot Plus PCs as well. So make sure that you join us for those.